Welcome to the CAP, the College Admissions Process podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT test preparation courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. They also offer college admissions consulting and tutoring. For more information, please go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success. Welcome to the CAP, where we are here to speak with college reps and other professionals in the field of college admissions to help answer all your questions and guide you through every step of the process. So if you're serious about college admissions, you've come to the right place. Are you ready? Let's talk about it. And now, here's your host, Dr. John Durante. Welcome to the CAP, the College Admissions Process podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today Akbar Rahel, who's the admissions director at Prep Expert, which of course is the podcast title sponsor. Akbar, it's been so long since I've been trying to get you on. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you very much for having me on. And I do want to begin by thanking you for all the great work that you do, bringing in a lot of great guests, and really enjoyed listening to many of your podcasts.
Well, I really appreciate that. It's definitely become a passion and I'm enjoying it so much. So thank you so much for the kind words. So Akbar, please take a moment to tell us about yourself and the great work you do at Prep Expert.
Thank you. So I am in the private space, and I guess I'll begin by telling you a little bit about how I came into it. So I began admissions consulting decades ago. I started in college helping friends and family members with their applications, undergraduate, graduate applications to law school, business school, MBA programs, PhD programs. Throughout undergraduate, then throughout law school, I was helping people out. Tons of people were coming to me for help and really created a lot of ways to help people with their essays, strategize for their essays, their stories, advising people on how to get into great colleges, how to get into great graduate schools, really kind of honing our strategies, our techniques. And then I started my own company around 2008. So I started my own college admissions consulting and tutoring company. By the way, I did do my undergrad at Berkeley. I did the pre-med route, but I ended up majoring in legal studies and I went to law school. So I went to law school at Georgetown, graduated, litigated for many years. And all along the way, I was helping people with admissions and tutoring. So I had my own company for about a decade. And while running my own company, I met the founder and CEO of Prep Expert, Dr. Sean Patel. And I remember one of my relatives had taken his SAT class in Las Vegas many years ago, back when his company was called 2400 Expert. So as many people know, and as you know, Sean ended up going on Shark Tank, Mark Cuban became the big investor, and that's about when I came on to start the admissions consulting department at Prep Expert. Of course, Prep Expert also has the SAT and ACT classes and tutoring. So I've been the admissions director now at Prep Expert for about, I don't even know, about 8 years now. And so we work with students, grades 7 through 12, two parts to what we do. The first part is working with students and families prior to the application process, helping them with their activities, leadership, research, maybe trying to get something published, competitions, class schedules, testing schedules, anything and everything that you can imagine. And the second part, of course, of what we do is helping students and families through the actual application process, helping them understand how to complete the common application, other applications that may not be on the common application, such as a school like MIT, helping them with their essays, the main common app essay, the supplemental questions, as you know, helping them complete the applications online. So two parts again, everything before the application process and then everything in the application process.
Well, we appreciate that so much. You sound like a true natural, helping friends and family in the very beginning and then opening up your own business in 2008. And of course, you partnered with Dr. Sean Patel, which is phenomenal. And so how do strong SAT or ACT scores impact college admissions decisions, especially in this test optional landscape?
So it's a great question. And begin by saying that I understand that this is a little bit of a contested space. There's a lot of kind of opinions about the impact of testing, how much weight we should play on testing. And I do really respect a lot of opinions in the education space with respect to testing. From my perspective, having done this for decades, having worked with countless students from all over the world, I'll say a few things from my perspective. One is there's so many kids that go to high school and you have kids with amazing grades and GPAs. And you know this as your role. There's so
Hmm.
many kids with high GPAs. You can look at countless high schools and you have maybe at least 100 students that have a 4.0 or over GPA weighted. And so testing really plays a critical role in helping differentiate students. And in fact, it's one of the easiest ways for students to help differentiate themselves. One thing is, of course, you've got so many kids with activities. You have so many kids with parents driving them around, the cost of activities, music lessons, golf lessons, tennis lessons, traveling for competition, all of these things. And the reality is that a lot of families can't afford all those things. And I think a lot of colleges have recognized that over the years and kind of come to the conclusion that, hey, these tests do matter and it is a great factor, one factor to take into consideration in the overall application process. In fact, there was a study by Stanford years ago, and it covered a whole nother topic, which is, hey, the essays in the application process themselves may be biased, which is something people don't talk about. The essays carry a lot of weight, and you know this in the education space. It is important for a student to write good essays, coherent essays, and present themselves in a great way to the admissions committees. And so many examples of this that I can speak about. There's also, of course, the issue of a student maybe having a bad semester or a few bad grades or even a bad year in high school. Testing is a great way for them to show kind of what they're capable of. So a great example of how testing can serve as a substitute sometimes if a student maybe had a bad semester or a bad year. Some other kind of considerations here is that I work with a lot of students over the years, decades of work from every type of student, private schools, including kind of the really fancy, expensive schools on the East and West Coast, and including in New York, students from all across the world, Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia. And I have always been convinced that many of the students that I've worked with who come from underrepresented areas, underrepresented schools, have gotten into extremely competitive colleges precisely because of their test scores, whether it's the SAT, the ACT, or their AP scores, for example. So, kind of a long-winded response to your question. Really, really well aware of a lot of these kind of issues in the testing space, especially with all the wonderful guests that you bring on here from the college admissions offices. So overall, the SAT, ACT scores do impact college admissions. And I would strongly recommend to any family that they do take these tests seriously for a variety of factors, some of which I just kind of covered.
Well, we appreciate that, especially when you talked about the fact that, yes, there are many students today that have great grades and very high GPAs. And so testing can help differentiate you students from the rest. And what I'll also add is that testing can also help you with merit-based scholarships or things like the National Merit Program, which for so many students is really very important in terms of helping them to pay for college later on. So, with the shift to the digital SAT, how should students adjust their study strategies to perform their best, of course, on standardized tests?
So with the shift to kind of digital, I think a lot of the advice would remain the same, which is understand the exam, understand the format, understand how you are being tested. The reality is that pretty much most students will have had taken the classes necessary to understand the material on these exams. It's not like the SAT or the ACT test on linear algebra or something like that. So it's important to understand the exams and understand how you're being tested. And that does not just relate to the SAT or the ACT or any other standardized test. I think it's a lesson in life. I mean, look, when I was in law school, understanding how to take a test is a large part of law school. In fact, my first year of law school, all the exams were open book. You can go on the internet, you can have anything you want in front of you and take those final exams. Why is that? Because we were being tested on how to apply the knowledge. And so that's what's critical is that it's not just a test, it's a test of how to apply knowledge. And of course, I sound biased coming from prep expert, test prep company as well. And I acknowledge that to be fair to everyone listening. But there is a certain set of skills being applied here, and that's how to apply your knowledge to testing. And from that perspective, I think preparing for the SAT or the ACT or any other standardized test goes beyond just the test themselves. We're trying to teach students a set of skills.
Well, I appreciate that. And even in my conversation with Sean Patel, it wasn't only about the test prep, but to your point, it's learning the skills in terms of how to apply knowledge, not only throughout standardized testing, but throughout life. So I really appreciate that. And how much time should a student dedicate to test prep? And when is the best time to start? I know that you said that you work with students typically grades 7 through 12, but when is the best time to start, would you say?
So it does vary from student to student because some students will not have taken the math classes necessary quite yet prior to preparing for the exams. Every student really is different, but generally speaking, I think as early as possible will only help. Even if a student is in ninth grade, if they start to understand the exam, if they start to dabble in the critical reading section to start to understand how they're going to be tested in the future, it's really never too early to start taking a look. Generally speaking, however, we do advise students to take an SAT or ACT prep. Look, whether it's us or whether it's another company, to start preparing after 10th grade because, as you know, for example, the PSAT, if someone is planning on the SAT, is in junior year. So I love it when students take the real SAT in August prior to the start of their junior year, because that way they're ready for the SAT and they're essentially ready for the PSAT. Of course, everyone's schedule varies. We have athletes, people traveling. Sometimes a student may have to take another class. But I think summer after sophomore year is a great time to take a prep class, whether it's for the SAT or the ACT. And one other benefit to that is that at least they'll have a strong foundation. So if they do have to take it again, they have all of junior year to kind of keep chipping away at it and understanding the exam better.
Well, I think those are great pieces of advice, particularly when you talked about how it depends. And it depends a lot on the curriculum that the student is taking in his or her high school. But I also appreciate the timeline that you expressed because that PSAT, which a lot of people think is the practice SAT, which it is, but it's also very important for the National Merit Scholarship Program. So, all great pieces of advice. Now, beyond test scores, what other factors should students focus on to strengthen their overall college applications?
Being in the private space here, I think there's a lot of bad information floating around, to be honest with you. We have consultations with families, and the first thing out of their mouth is, what is a passion project my child should do? I'm sure you've heard that phrase ad nauseum at this
All the
point.
time.
And so my response was very honest and very simple to every family. Hey, your grades will always remain the number one factor in the application process. Grades, rigor of curriculum. For the more competitive colleges, and of course, I'm not just talking about the most selective or most rejective colleges, however we want to phrase it. Look, as you know, the top 50 colleges are pretty competitive, right? There's a lot of great colleges there that are pretty hard to get into that may have been considered backup schools 10, 15 years ago. They're not anymore. And so, first and foremost, grades, rigor of curriculum. And then, of course, for the more competitive colleges, we're looking at activities, leadership, competitions. Someone's a computer science major, USACO, hackathons. You have the AMC, the AME exams. You have science Olympiads. You have all kinds of these different competitions where a student can help differentiate themselves. In the social sciences and the humanities, you have different things as well that students can do with respect to research, publications. So it really is everything. And that's the reason why I don't like the idea of, quite honestly, some admissions consultants and companies pushing the idea of, hey, come to us and we're just going to give you the secret of getting in. It's not one thing. You know that. We know that. It's
Absolutely.
not
There's
one thing.
never any
Yeah,
guarantees.
yeah. And look, it's the aggregate. It's the aggregate of someone's grades, test scores, leadership, activities, and as you know, letters of recommendation and a lot of other factors. And I think it's important for people to understand that, especially to families who may be listening.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And what I would add to that is that some of the admissions reps that I spoke to, they alluded to the fact that, look, if you're trying to sound like, for example, pick Duke University, just as an example, which is a great school, very competitive. If you know of students that were admitted there and you're trying to develop this profile of what type of student does Duke University, for example, want to admit, if you look at it through that lens, you're going to sound like a lot of other applicants, and you're not going to really differentiate yourself in a very competitive pool. So I think it's very important, students, to not only look for that magic formula, because, as Akbar said, there's a lot of bad information out there. Yes, if you love Science Olympiad, if you want to write a book, if you want to do a podcast, whatever it is that you do it because it's something that's meaningful to you, that's passionate for you, that you want to do it because it's something that is near and dear to the type of person that you are, as opposed to just trying to fit a profile of what you think an admissions rep is looking for to admit you in their college. But what do you have to say about that, Akbar?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I'll give you an example. We worked with a student recently, and recent for me is in the last 5 years because I've been doing this so long. Let me put this in a way that'll keep it broad. The family owned a few restaurants, and the student worked in the family restaurants for 30, 40 hours a week since they were in seventh, eighth
Wow.
grade. And that was pretty much their only activity in high school. There were no leadership, model UN, or anything like that. And the parents kind of freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, they didn't really think about everything else ahead of time. And I said, don't worry. The kid had solid grades, focused in on the SAT. We presented a great application, put a great spin on all the amazing experience the student had working in the family restaurant, and they ended up at a top 10 school.
I'm not surprised.
And look, the kid really stood out because this was not the kid with 10 activities in the common application. This was not the kid with competitions. This was a kid that said, hey, I started washing dishes when I was in eighth grade. And then I
Right.
worked my way up through different leadership positions. And it was a great application, of course, helped them through that whole process and how to present himself and that kind of thing. But it really was an example of how every kid can genuinely be different.
They are genuinely different, and students, you really should be yourself. You have to remember that the people on the other side receiving your applications, they're actually human beings. We're not at a point where AI is reading applications and evaluating applications. My guest on the podcast will tell you, guys, it's us. We're human beings on the opposite end. And so when you're reading the same application over and over again, the same profile, I would imagine that it gets quite boring. Let's say you're reading 40, 50 applications a day, but all of a sudden you have a student working in a restaurant, as you put it, for 40 hours a week. Wow, think about that. Think about the leadership. Think about the sacrifice. Think about dealing with their supervisors, who might be their parents in this case, but also dealing with customers. Think of the leadership that they learn. That is something that absolutely must be put on an application, because if you don't put your work experience on the application and you don't have 3, 4, 5 activities at school, now you're leaving it up to the admissions representatives to speculate as to why you don't have activities in terms of the typical clubs that we know about that students participate in after school. But if you're working, that's the reason why. So I think it's a great point that you mentioned that, and I'm glad to hear that the student ended up in great schools, which I'm not surprised about at all. I was curious, I do want to shift a little bit about the private side of things. How do private admissions counselors, Akbar, ensure that students complete their own work and maintain their own voices throughout that application process?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of ways that we do that. I'll give you an example. In the application process, we teach students how to write their essays. And we spend thousands and thousands of hours editing essays, going back and forth, explaining to students how to write essays. And these essays are different from a lot of essays they may have written in the past in classes. You don't write a Common App essay, as you know, by having an introduction and a thesis and topic sentence and supporting evidence. Everyone will fall asleep reading it. So one thing I love about the application process is that colleges are genuinely trying to dig in deep to students, lead them with their essay questions. Tons of schools have different types of questions, whether it's Duke or Northwestern or Ivy League or tons of other great colleges, Boston College, Boston University, whatever it may be. So it's not like the old days when we applied, it just said, write your personal statement here. And that was it, right? The UC application back in the day was essentially a 2-page double-spaced statement. Now they have 8 questions and you choose 4 of them.
The
You know,
PIQs.
all these questions have, and I remember writing my UC application the night before. And if you're listening to this, please don't do what I did when I was in high school. But these colleges, they've really done a great job, and lots of great people in this space of trying to dig a little deeper with the questions. Hey, tell us about yourself. What's a challenge? What's a conversation you've had that was difficult? To understand a student's background, the common application questions, I think, now do a great job of presenting students with different options about how to tell their story to the admissions offices. So one, we teach students how to write the essays. Hey, this is a great way to begin an essay. We even show them some models, but then we dig deeper with them. Hey, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background. We really get to know families. And we don't just flat out tell someone, do this and don't give us your opinion. We want to hear their suggestions. We want them to tell us about themselves because ultimately that will lead to the best results. We do everything we can to get to know the students and the families. We lead them through the process. We keep them engaged. We go through numerous drafts. Of course, if a family or a student says, hey, I want to write about topic A, we may say, hey, that's not a good topic, and here's the reasons why. We help students decipher what to write about and what not to write about. And I think that's the way you keep students engaged. And I think it's important to maintain that through the process because the students' voices will come out. I mean, I'll give you an example. And I know sometimes in this space, nobody wants to talk about things when it doesn't work out perfectly. But I'll give you an example of something that happened a few years ago. And it happens every once in a while. I mean, I've been in this space for over 25 years. So I've kind of seen every type of scenario unfold. But there was a student we were working with, great kid, and submitted some applications with us. But then I could tell that for some reason, they kind of dropped off. And what I think happened was the parents just didn't want the kid to spend any more time drafting, which they just didn't want him to work on his applications anymore. And so I think what happened was, and I'm pretty sure about this, they just kind of hired someone to write the kids' essays. So later on, after it all was said and done, the kid got into the schools that we had helped them with, and the schools that they had hired someone else for, and I'm pretty much 100% positive about this because they sent us the essays, they did not get in. And when I read the other essays, they didn't represent the student's voice at all. The way the essays were written did not represent the student's voice at all. This was a more introspective child, very smart, very nice, but the essays made it sound like this person was Mr. Popularity. And I think that the essays just didn't match up with the recommendations or the overall profile. And the parents recognized the mistake, and they realized that what we had worked on represented the student, and the other track did not. And it showed through in the results.
This is your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome back Sean Patel, who's the founder and CEO of Prep Expert. Sean, welcome back.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. And I'm so excited to announce that Prep Expert is the official title sponsor of the College Admissions Process podcast. This has been a partnership in the works for a while now, and I'm so glad we got it off the ground. We're so excited to work with families, parents, students of the College Admissions Process podcast at Prep Expert to help them through our live online SAT and ACT courses, not only improve their SAT and ACT scores, but help them get into college as well as win hundreds of thousands of dollars in college scholarships. Thank you so much for the partnership, and we are so excited to work with your families.
Thank you, Sean. And to learn more about how Prep Expert can support your child's academic journey, visit prepexpert.com today, and best wishes to all. And that's such a great story. I'm glad you shared that scenario, because over and over again in my podcast episodes, I hear the admissions representative saying, students, you have to use your authentic voice. As I said earlier, they probably read, when they're evaluating the essays, the applications, they're probably reading 40 to 50 essays a day. And so they become expert students in terms of seeing if something was AI generated, for example, or if it was generated by someone else other than you. It's funny, I was talking to someone recently, and, I'm so old and I'm going to give my age away here, but after a period, we would use a double space, 2 spaces with the space bar, when nowadays you don't do that anymore. So one rep actually shared with me that when she saw an essay that after a period there was actually a double space, she knew that the 17-year-old had not written that. So
Right.
it's just great advice that you're giving, and you really have to be careful. So, Akbar, how do you, as a private college counselor, set those expectations with families and, of course, the students?
One is through trust. I mean, the families trust us. They see the level of experience of me and my team. And look, 99% of the time, this process runs really smooth. But sometimes we do have to interject it a little bit. I'll give you an example. I was on a call with a family, and what I noticed was the parent just kept answering every question. The student was not speaking at all. So I chimed in and I said, hey, this is a student-led process. I hope you can appreciate that. Can you let so-and-so respond to my questions? And I'm not afraid to do that with families, because the students have to stay engaged. And if they're kind of tuning out, I promise anyone listening that you're not going to get the results that you want. And so it's important for counselors to have that respect, to have that sense of professionalism. This is something that I impart to members of my team. Sometimes people come onto our team, they're highly qualified, wonderful people, but they don't have that confidence to maintain control of the process. And I think it's important for counselors, especially in the private space, to do that. Of course, I can go through many examples of this. Again, when you've been in this space for as long as I've been, I've seen tons of different scenarios. There was another family where one parent kept intervening in the essays, and they kept changing the essays. I'm sure you've heard this thousands of times over
Yes.
again. And they kept changing the essay to sound super boring, to focus on the word career. The word career showed up like 14 times in the Common App essay. I want a career, I want a career. It sounded like it was written by a McKinsey alum. And I'll make a long story short, which was the student emailed me and said, hey, my parents keep changing everything. And of course, we share that with the parents. This is a completely transparent process. And again, this is a few and far between type story. This is the 1% where it goes a little bit the direction we don't want it to go. But it's important for us to share these stories so people understand kind of the space a little bit better. The student did not, the parents kept intervening. There was a lot of other things going on with the parents pressuring the kid and that kind of thing. And the kid ended up not getting in to schools that they definitely should have gotten into. Wonderful kid. And, it was an example of, hey, the student's voice was not showing through. And the
Right.
parents really had a negative impact on the kid's application.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but as you know, that happens time and time again every single year. And, we keep coming back to the importance of the student voice. And another rep gave some great advice to help maintain that student voice, which is most of us have a cell phone nowadays. So when you write your essay, students, record it. Record it on your cell phone. Play it back. Play it back again. Does it sound like you? If someone listens to it, are they learning a lot of new things about who you are as a person? That's going to help you get to that point where you're really providing an essay that shows your authentic voice. It's so important in the process. Probably every podcast episode when we talk about the essays, that's exactly what the admissions representatives are reporting. That's what they want to hear. And again, I repeat, they probably read 40 to 50 essays a day. They are experts at detecting AI generated essays or essays that are not written by a 17-year-old. So be careful with that. And Akbar, what would you say are some other broader ethical considerations within the private space?
So, one is having students do the work, of course, do the leadership, follow, do things that they want to do because that will lead to the best results. We're very student centered and family centered, of course. When we're in the application process, we teach students how to write the essays. We have a whole pre-writing process where we lead them through, make it as easy as possible. This really should be a very smooth process, and it is 99% of the time. A few of the kind of bad stories I've shared here is to kind of shed light on those rare instances in which it doesn't quite go right. But in terms of ethics, I mean, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. One of which is I think it's important for companies and individual counselors to communicate fairly and clearly to families. When we communicate with families, we're very honest about where the student is, what they can do, what's realistic, and where they are in the process and the schools that are the so-called reach, target, and backup schools. And we can do a lot. We can do a lot to build up students' profiles and all that stuff. But one thing that I find unethical is when people overpromise. And I think that gives our space a little bit of a bad name, where companies are saying, hey, come to us and we're going to guarantee get into certain schools. And look, again, I think it's important to be honest in these podcasts because I think you have a lot of, one, it's the right thing to do, just
Right.
generally in life. And two, you have a lot of sophisticated people listening to this podcast, people who are smart and intelligent, such as yourself and tons of other people and families. I'll give you an example of something that happened about a year and a half ago. We had a consultation with a family, very nice family, and nice kid, everything. The kid had like a 3.4 GPA, solid grades, but not a 4.5 student or something like that. Had some activities, and the family was saying, hey, we want to get into the absolute most competitive colleges. It was late junior year. And again, wonderful kid, lots of great colleges out there for him, lots of colleges that would be a great fit. But the family, just from the beginning, was like, oh, this is where we want to go. And I think they were very disappointed for me to tell them, hey, look, those colleges that you're talking about, the absolute most selective, most rejective, are going to be out of reach at this point. And they didn't quite listen to me the first time I said it when I was speaking to them. And I had to tell them, look, they kept repeating their goal. And I said, look, to be fair to you, there is no way any person, including myself, is going to help you get into those schools.
Well,
And this
I'm glad you
family,
said that. I'm glad you said that. Go ahead.
yeah, and look, I mean, I could have said the right things and they could have signed up. I mean, money was not an issue for them. The kid was going to an elite kind of I don't want to use the word elite, but they was going to a very expensive private school. The family made it clear they're willing to spend whatever. But it would have been very unethical for me to say, sure, go ahead and sign up and we'll put these schools in play. Because what I don't want to do is mislead people. Nobody's going to work with Prep Expert and come away saying, hey, they didn't tell us the whole thing from the beginning. We're always very clear, straightforward, because they also have to make important decisions later on, like their college list, like where to do an early decision or an early action or single choice, whatever it may be. And what we don't want to do is make all these promises, and then you get to the application process, and then you undercut everybody. So look, we work with a range of families. We have kids with 1,600 SAT scores and aiming for those absolute most competitive colleges. And look, we have a lot of kids who are wonderful kids. They're going to do great in life, but they're not those kids with those grades. And it's important to be fair to everybody.
Well, I'm so glad you talked about, first of all, folks, no guarantees. You never guarantee admissions into any school, particularly those schools that are reach schools that are on those lists of the top 50, the top 100. And the other thing I want to talk about, because it comes to mind, I recently did an episode. It just happens to be Notre Dame University, and whether anyone is looking to apply to that school or not, which is on the smaller side, obviously, they have an institutional priority where they want to accept 2,100 students in terms of their freshman class. That's their institutional priority. Well, they receive 30,000 applications for those 2,100 spots. And so proportionately, those numbers are true for so many colleges and universities throughout the country. And so I always talk to the admissions representatives in terms of that first 30%. If you could actually take out the first 30% in an application pool that unfortunately were rejected, those profiles are probably not that different than the students who were actually admitted, pointing to the fact that there are far more qualified applicants in terms of grades, in terms of activities outside of the classroom than the seats available. And so I appreciate what you talked about earlier, where, yes, apply to the reach schools, the target schools, and the safety schools, but recognize there's no guarantees. And frankly, if you're applying to a school where their admissions rate is 15% or less, well, regardless if you have the A plus average, the perfect SAT score, you're the captain of the football team, because of the number of qualified applicants applying with far fewer seats available, those schools that admit 15% or less, they are reach schools for everyone. So it's an important thing for students and families to keep in mind as you navigate the college admissions process, because a lot of times people say, wow, it's so stressful. Well, if you're only applying to those elite schools, it is stressful. So again, the importance of that balanced list, the reach schools, target schools, and of course, safety. Now, Akbar, when you're working with students, what steps do you take to support students in those meetings when you're working with them one-on-one?
So we do a lot. First of all, answering their questions. What can they do to get into a great college? And of course, I am in the private space, so people are hiring me and members of my team to help them get into a great college. And so we're saying, hey, here's where you are. Let's look at your activities. Let's look at your time commitments, understanding the student. I have personally advised on a one-on-one basis, maybe 1,200 families, to give you an idea.
Wow.
Probably more than a lot of companies in this space right now. That's how long I've been doing it. Everything from the ground up, essays, advising, everything you can imagine at the undergraduate and graduate level, law, business, medicine, pharmacy, MBA, everything, PhD programs. So it's really understanding the student. We have students in cities, private schools, public schools, dual enrollment classes, students who are in the sciences, computer science, engineering, social sciences, humanities, gender studies, you name it. So understanding the student, understanding the family's goals, helping them understand the application process, because, as you know, we also can't sugarcoat it. It is competitive, as you know. A great school like Notre Dame is only going to accept so many students. And there's a very long list of schools like that. Some people think it's only Ivy League. It's not, as you know that. There's a lot of great schools that are extremely competitive. So advising on their activities, leadership, publications, and volunteering initiatives, their time commitments. We're kind of like an outside auditor, someone coming in and saying, hey, what's going on here? How much time are you spending on activity A or B? What do you really want to do? And suddenly you find out a kid says, you know what, I don't really like tennis. I don't really want to do this, and it's sucking up all my time. You say, okay, well, why don't you drop it? Let's go to something else that you want to do. So working with them, everything prior to the application process, their testing, and again, really helping them understand where their time should be spent that's efficient, where they want to spend the time, and what is going to be impactful for the college application process, and what is going to be authentic for them and their intended major. Because if a student is doing something they don't want to do, chances are something's going to break in the process. They're going to want to stop doing something, their grades are going to drop, something's going to happen. A lot of conversation is talking to students about their major choices, what they want to do in the future. A lot of people say, hey, I want to be this type of major, but I don't know what that means. And one thing that I point out in the webinars that I do is that students apply to college and suddenly you have a choice of like 100 majors. But the reality is the vast majority of students have never even taken classes in those majors, right? How are you supposed to check off political science or anthropology or gender studies or East Asian studies or civil engineering or mechanical engineering or nuclear engineering or CS? I think a lot of kids have a better idea of because they do coding and stuff like that. But there's so many majors they don't even understand. So we may have students take a class in data science, for example, which is not a class offered at the vast majority of high schools, if any. So we're doing a lot of that in the years prior to the application process, answering their questions, being a source of support, both academically and non-academically, for the student and the parents, by the way. Because as you know, parents are talking about the admissions process. They're talking to their friends and their families, and some people are freaked out about everything, right? And I got to kind of bring everyone back from the ledge and say, hey, just relax. This is how we're going to do it. And then in the application process, providing a ton of support in terms of how to write the essays, leading the students along the way, teaching them how to write the essays, setting up the applications. In other words, what's coming in the common application, what is going to come into the supplemental questions, how do you do those short take responses, the supplemental, the editing, presenting themselves in the right way, filling out the applications. And of course, again, this may sound biased coming from me. I mean, I'm in the private space with Prep Expert. I totally acknowledge that. But the great thing about the application process in America is that it really is holistic. Colleges really are looking at grades and a lot of other things. But the downside of it is if families don't know how to package themselves, they can really hurt themselves too. And that is a downside to this process, which is knowing what to write about, how to present yourself, how to fill out the activities section in the UC and the common application. And for a student to do that all by themselves, or a family to do that all by himself, is extraordinarily difficult, as I think you would agree with.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree.
And again, I'm not saying that to plug our services right now. I'm just saying that because it is a reality. I think any admissions officer that would come on to your podcast, wonderful people, very knowledgeable people, will say the same thing, which is, hey, we're reading the essays and we're reading the supplemental essays. And you can have an amazing kid. And if they don't do it right, they're really going to shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you an example. We had a student last year come to us and they had gone through the application process already. They went to a fancy school and the common app essay was about the sport that they played. And they ended up getting rejected from everywhere the way they wanted to go. So they went to another college and they came to us and they said, hey, we want your help for transferring. And I had a call with this student and immediately, I mean, this student had so many interesting things that stood out. They had met the president of another country.
Wow.
They had done all this amazing work in human rights, and none of it was showing through in what they had submitted initially. And it shocked me because I was like, how did this all get missed? Of course, my background is in law. I've taken and defended many depositions. So one part of the process for me is kind of deposing families. Tell me about yourself, listening to them. If I hear something that needs a follow-up question, I'll ask a follow-up question. And so this kid went through the transfer process. They went 9 for 9, got into a ton of great colleges like Michigan and UVA. But it just goes to show that, hey, look, all of these things matter. And we
Definitely.
support students and families in every way in really kind of helping them how to present themselves before the application process and in the application process. I want to add one last thing here, which is I was giving an in-person seminar years ago. It was actually in your area, New York, New Jersey. It was before the pandemic. And a parent raised their hand, they asked their question. They said, hey, if a student is doing all these activities for purposes of the application process, will this all seem contrived? In the sense that the kid is not doing it for themselves, but for purposes of the application process. It was a very fair question. And my response then and my response now is, our goal is not to have a contrived process. Our goal is to bring out the best in every student. That's what ultimately matters to me as someone who's worked with so many students and so many families and mentored so many students, some of which are actually tenured professors in the Ivy League now. I generally just want to bring out the best in every student.
Well, those are great pieces of advice, and I agree with everything that you said. First of all, understanding students and families, the overall application, the different parts, what they all represent, how each needs to complement each other and build upon each other without repeating what's in other parts. For example, the transcript is obviously the number one piece of paper that is going to show your academic trends over 4 years of high school. The activity sheet, whatever it is that you did outside of the classroom, whether it was holding a job, clubs, athletics, what have you. If you write a personal essay where you're basically repeating what's in your transcript or on your activity sheet, it really is a missed opportunity. And the other missed opportunity is that the student, the example that you gave where the student wrote about a sports topic. And by the way, the two biggest topics that students write about, sports injuries and writing about a loved one. Those are the two constant themes that come up in the podcast episodes. And so if you want to differentiate yourself, perhaps don't use those topics. Now, in the case of the student that you mentioned, that student met a president of another country and yet never talked about that anywhere in the overall application. Probably a missed opportunity. So I agree with all of those pieces. Now, Akbar, this has been a phenomenal conversation. We're coming close to the end. Before I ask you the last question, I always like to ask my guests, is there a question that I didn't ask you today or a topic that simply didn't come up throughout our conversation that you'd like to share with us now?
Great question, and I think you really kind of hit a lot of great points here. And if as you know, there's a ton to talk about. There's always in the space. There's a limited amount of time.
Right.
And I do webinars, and people ask me questions, and I'd love to stay on for 9 hours and answer every single question, but there's only so much ground we can cover.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. And so before I do ask the last question, and I will put this information in the show notes, if students or families want to reach out to you, Akbar, how can they reach you?
Thank you. So prepexpert.com, and you can click on college admissions, and we do offer free consultations to families. Prepexpert.com, click on college admissions. We do offer a free consultation to every family.
Fantastic. And of course, we will link that in the show notes. And so the last question, what are your top pieces of advice for students and their families getting ready for the college admissions process?
Top piece of advice. Great question. I guess I have so many. Let me think about a few that I can throw out here. One is, don't listen to the noise. I have families ask me questions like, well, we're employed, we're both doctors, we live in a wealthy area. How is that going to hurt our kid in the application process? Or getting to some of those issues. And I say, look, you are who you are, and be proud of who you are. And there's some factors that we don't control in this process. If a student has not faced a significant personal obstacle in their life, that's a blessing. Be happy with that. I read an article, maybe even came across it. I'm not going to say which one specifically. And it was, I guess, a counselor had a comment in the article saying that this kid had faced this huge obstacle. The parent was sick, and that was a blessing for them, right? For purpose of admissions, which I thought was a little odd because obviously life is bigger than college admission. So don't listen to the noise. Don't let it become a stressful process, because it's not a healthy emotion for a high school student to have stress about this. When we work with students, I say, hey, we want to bring out the best in you. You've got to put in the effort. There are no shortcuts. Even with the greatest advice in the universe, you have to put in the effort. So that's one piece of advice. Number two is, I encourage families to think about the process in advance. Think about their goals. We work with a wide range of families, wide range of students, and be grounded in the process. And I think any admissions person would agree with that. Bring out the best in your student. Every kid is genuinely different. And number three, and again, of course, I'm going to sound heavily biased when I say this, but I do think it's important for families to get outside help, because there's a lot going on in this process, and no parent or student is going to understand this, even by reading websites or talking to their friends and family. You're just not going to understand everything that's going on. And I don't say that to plug Prep Expert again here, but there's a lot of information in this space. And it's like someone trying to self-represent themselves in court. Can you do some Google searches and stuff? Yeah, but is it really going to work? As you know, unfortunately, at public schools, the ratio of students to counselors is just crazy, right? I don't know what the official statistic is now. I think it's 400 to 1 or something like that,
It
right?
varies, but that's an accurate number, but it does vary.
And even at private schools, they're just a counselor, as nice as they are and as knowledgeable as all, they're just not going to be able to spend that much time. And so, again, I fully acknowledge my positionality in saying this, but it is important to get help. It is important to understand the process. And I think that leads to a lot of good outcomes in terms of bringing out the best in what a kid is doing. In the same way you might hire someone to teach your kid piano, or someone teach them violin, or maybe teach them how to draw and engage in art or something, right? Like this has to be a process that's not just viewed about college admission, but just about bringing out the best in every child.
Well, those are phenomenal pieces of advice. I am so happy that I had you on the podcast episode. Obviously, Prep Expert is really fortunate to have you as part of their team, as are we to have you here today. Akbar, I do hope to have you again. Thank you so much for everything today.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
My pleasure. And to everyone out there, good luck with the college search. Take care all, and best wishes.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the CAP.
Thank you for listening to the College Admissions Process Podcast presented by Prep Expert. Prep Expert offers live online SAT and ACT courses with the best score guarantees, instructors, and curriculum. Go to prepexpert.com to guarantee your child's success.